Unaware he just inherited a $10 billion resort empire at his father's funeral, my wife and her lover. Marcus stood silently beside his father's casket, his heart shattered not only by loss but by the sight of his wife, whispering intimately with a stranger in the corner of the funeral parlor. While he choked back tears of betrayal at his own father's service, the family lawyer quietly slipped him a sealed envelope with the message, "Come see me immediately." Marcus couldn't imagine that the secret inside would completely transform his life and turn those who betrayed him into enemies of themselves. Before we continue, smash that subscribe button. If you're as excited as we are, give this video a thumbs up and let us know where you're watching from: Phoenix, Dallas, or the vibrant streets of LA. Let's see how Marcus discovers the truth that will change everything. The rain drummed against the windows of Mercy Memorial Funeral Home as Marcus Thompson stood motionless before his father's mahogany casket. At 45, he had weathered many storms in his life as a structural engineer, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Richard Thompson lay peaceful in his final rest, wearing the same modest gray suit he'd worn to Marcus's college graduation 23 years ago. The sight of his father's weathered hands, now forever still, sent waves of grief crashing through Marcus's chest. Those hands had taught him to build, to create, to stand tall despite every obstacle life threw their way. "He looks so peaceful," Sarah whispered beside him, but her voice carried a strange detachment that made Marcus's skin crawl. His wife of 18 years stood close enough to touch, yet she felt miles away. Her black dress was more elegant than mourning, her makeup perfectly applied despite the occasion. Marcus noticed how her eyes kept drifting toward the back of the room where David Miller lingered near the flower arrangements. David, supposedly a family friend, who had appeared in their lives 6 months ago, offering Sarah support during Richard's illness. The way Sarah's fingers trembled when she spoke David's name should have been Marcus's first warning. The funeral parlor buzzed with quiet conversations, but Marcus felt isolated in his grief. His father had been his anchor, the one person who understood his dreams and fears without judgment. Richard had worked 3 jobs to put Marcus through engineering school, never complaining about the sacrifices. Now, watching Sarah exchange meaningful glances with David across the room, Marcus wondered if he had ever truly known the woman he married. Her mother, Helen, stood nearby with her usual disapproving expression, whispering to David as if Marcus weren't even there. The contempt in Helen's eyes had grown sharper over the years, especially after Marcus's modest construction projects failed to meet her expectations of wealth. "Marcus, I'm so sorry for your loss." David approached with practiced sympathy, extending a manicured hand that had clearly never known hard labor. His expensive suit and confident demeanor screamed success in ways that made Marcus feel small in his off-the-rack funeral attire. "Your father was a remarkable man. Sarah's told me so much about him." The casual familiarity in David's voice when he mentioned Sarah made Marcus's jaw tighten. Why was this stranger speaking as if he knew Richard Thompson? Why did Sarah share family stories with someone who had no right to them? The receiving line moved slowly, each condolence feeling hollow against Marcus's mounting anxiety. Friends and neighbors offered their sympathies, but he could barely focus on their words. His attention kept returning to Sarah and David, their subtle intimacy playing out like a cruel theater performance during his darkest hour. When David placed a comforting hand on Sarah's lower back, guiding her toward the guest book, Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. The gesture was too familiar, too possessive, too much like the way a husband would touch his wife. "Mr. Thompson," a distinguished voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. James Wilson, his father's lawyer, appeared beside him carrying a leather briefcase. Marcus had met the man only twice, both times when his father was updating his will during his final illness. Wilson's silver hair and sharp suit suggested success, though Marcus had always wondered why his modest father needed such an expensive attorney. "I need to speak with you privately. There are matters we must discuss immediately." Wilson's tone carried an urgency that seemed out of place at a funeral, his eyes darting nervously towards Sarah and David. Before Marcus could respond, Helen's voice cut through the quiet murmur of conversations. "Marcus, we need to talk about the house arrangements. Sarah can't stay in that cramped little place much longer." Her words dripped with disdain, as if his 3-bedroom home in a decent neighborhood was somehow beneath her daughter. David has been kind enough to offer his assistance during this difficult time. The way she emphasized David's name made it clear that Helen preferred the stranger's company to her own son-in-law's presence. Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. His father lay dead, his wife was clearly involved with another man, his mother-in-law treated him like a burden, and now the family lawyer was acting as if the world was about to end. Wilson pressed a sealed envelope into Marcus's hand, the heavy paper bearing his father's initials embossed in gold. "Don't open this here," Wilson whispered urgently. "Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9. And Marcus, come alone." The lawyer's warning sent ice through Marcus's veins as he slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket, feeling its weight like a stone against his heart. The silence in Marcus's home felt suffocating as he stood in the doorway, still wearing his funeral suit. The modest 3-bedroom house that had once felt warm and welcoming now seemed foreign, as if he were intruding on someone else's life. Sarah had arrived before him, and the sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood floors echoed from upstairs. When he climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Marcus discovered cardboard boxes stacked neatly in the corner, filled with his clothes, books, and personal belongings. His engineering awards, his father's old tools, even his college diploma had been packed away like unwanted memories. "What's all this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah emerged from the walk-in closet, her funeral dress already replaced by jeans and a sweater that David had complimented last week. Her movements were brisk and efficient, as if she had been planning this moment for months. "I thought you might be more comfortable in the basement for a while," she said without meeting his eyes. "David needs somewhere to stay temporarily, and the guest room has better light for his work." The casual way she mentioned David's needs, as if they took precedence over her husband's comfort in his own home, felt like a physical blow. Marcus sank onto the edge of their bed, the mattress where they had shared 18 years of marriage, now feeling like quicksand beneath him. "Sarah, we buried my father today." "Today?" His voice cracked with exhaustion and disbelief. "Can we at least talk about what's happening here?" She continued folding clothes into another box, her movements mechanical and cold. "David has been going through a difficult divorce. He needs support from people who understand." The irony of her words wasn't lost on Marcus. She was talking about supporting someone else's divorce while destroying her own marriage. The sound of a key turning in the front door made them both freeze. Heavy footsteps climbed the stairs with the confidence of someone who belonged in the house. David appeared in the doorway carrying a leather overnight bag and a garment bag, his presence filling the room like toxic smoke. "Sorry I'm late," he said to Sarah, completely ignoring Marcus's existence. "I had to swing by my place to grab some things." The casual intimacy in his tone, the way he spoke as if Marcus weren't sitting right there, made the betrayal complete and undeniable. "David, maybe we should discuss this later," Sarah said nervously, finally acknowledging the awkwardness of the situation. But David stepped forward with the arrogance of a man who had already won. "Marcus, I want you to know that Sarah and I never intended for things to develop this way. Sometimes life throws unexpected curveballs." His practiced words felt rehearsed, as if he had delivered this speech before to other husbands. "We've grown close over these past few months, and we both realize that we can't ignore these feelings anymore." Marcus stood slowly, his engineer's mind processing the structural collapse of his life with the same methodical approach he used to assess damaged buildings. "How long?" he asked quietly. Sarah's face flushed, but David answered without hesitation. 3 months, maybe 4. We tried to fight it, but sometimes the heart wants what it wants." The cliché phrase hung in the air like a bad joke. 3 months. His father had been dying for 3 months, and while Marcus spent every evening at the hospital, his wife had been building a new life with another man. Helen's voice drifted up from downstairs, sharp and commanding as always. "Sarah, honey, I brought dinner. David, I got that wine you like from the good store." Marcus's mother-in-law had keys to his house, was bringing dinner for his wife's lover, and was treating his home like her own personal dining establishment. The complete disrespect would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. "She's been incredibly supportive," David said, as if reading Marcus's thoughts. "Helen understands what Sarah needs right now." The sealed envelope in Marcus's jacket pocket suddenly felt heavier, pressing against his chest like his father's final secret. He pulled it out slowly, studying the gold-embossed initials that matched his own. Richard Thompson had known something was coming. The urgency in James Wilson's voice, the mysterious meeting request, the warning to come alone, his father had left him something important, something that couldn't wait for a normal probate process. "I need some air," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. Sarah called after him as he headed for the door, but her words felt empty and meaningless. "Marcus, we can work out the details later. We're all adults here." The phrase "we're all adults" echoed in his mind as he walked through his neighborhood, past houses where real families lived, where husbands weren't relegated to basements in their own homes. The envelope remained sealed in his pocket, his father's final gift waiting for the right moment. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, James Wilson would reveal whatever Richard Thompson had hidden from the world, and Marcus suspected his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Marcus sat in the parking garage of Wilson & Associates law firm for 20 minutes before finding the courage to walk inside. The sleek downtown building stretched 30 floors into the Seattle skyline, its glass facade reflecting a city he suddenly felt disconnected from. His modest Honda Civic looked out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs in the executive parking section, but the security guard had insisted he park there after checking his name against some special list. The elevator ride to the 28th floor felt endless, each floor marking another step toward whatever revelation his father had left behind. James Wilson's office commanded a breathtaking view of Elliott Bay, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made the space feel suspended in the clouds. The mahogany desk, Persian rugs, and first edition law books spoke of success far beyond what Marcus had imagined his father could afford. "Thank you for coming promptly," Wilson said, gesturing toward a leather chair that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment. "Before we begin, I need you to understand that everything your father told me was in the strictest confidence. Even now, I'm bound by attorney-client privilege, but Richard specifically requested that I share certain information with you upon his death." The sealed envelope sat between them on the desk like a loaded weapon. Wilson's hands trembled slightly as he opened his own files, revealing documents stamped with corporate seals and legal watermarks that Marcus didn't recognize. "Your father was a very private man, Marcus. He believed that wealth attracted the wrong kind of attention, especially for a black man in America. Everything he built, everything he achieved, was designed to protect you from people who might try to use you or hurt you." The lawyer's words felt surreal, as if they were discussing someone else's father rather than Richard Thompson, who had worked construction jobs and driven a 15-year-old pickup truck. Wilson pulled out a thick folder marked Thompson Resort Group, Confidential. The letterhead featured an elegant logo that looked nothing like anything Marcus had ever seen in his father's possession. "Richard founded Thompson Resort Group 28 years ago, shortly before you graduated from college. He started with a small property investment in the San Juan Islands and built it into one of the most successful luxury resort chains on the West Coast." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Resort chain, luxury properties. His father, who had lived in a modest apartment and shopped at discount grocery stores, owned resorts? The financial statements Wilson spread across the desk showed numbers that made Marcus's head spin. Annual revenues in the hundreds of millions, properties spanning from British Columbia to Northern California, a corporate headquarters in downtown Vancouver that employed over 2,000 people. The current valuation of Thompson Resort Group, including all properties, investments, and liquid assets, is approximately $10 billion, Wilson said quietly. "As of yesterday, you are the sole heir to this empire." Marcus stared at the documents until the numbers blurred together, his mind refusing to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. "But how? Why didn't he tell me?" Marcus's voice sounded foreign to his own ears. Wilson leaned back in his chair, his expression mixing sympathy with something that looked like admiration. "Richard was brilliant, Marcus. He understood that sudden wealth could destroy families, attract gold diggers, and make people targets for crime or exploitation. He wanted you to become the man you are today based on your own merit, not because you expected to inherit billions." The explanation made sense in a terrifying way. Every lesson about hard work, every lecture about earning respect, every moment his father had pushed him to be self-reliant suddenly took on new meaning. Wilson opened another file, this one containing photographs of stunning resort properties nestled along coastlines and mountain ranges. Richard hired the best managers in the hospitality industry, but he made every major decision himself. He knew every property, every employee, every guest satisfaction score. The business has been incredibly successful precisely because he never lost sight of what quality meant. Marcus recognized his father's perfectionist nature in the immaculate presentation folders and detailed operational reports. But seeing it applied to billion-dollar enterprises felt like discovering his father had been living a double life. "There's one condition to the inheritance," Wilson continued, his tone becoming more serious. "You have 30 days to demonstrate that you can handle the responsibility of running Thompson Resort Group." Richard designed this as a test of leadership, not wealth management. If you can't prove yourself capable within that time frame, the lawyer paused meaningfully. The entire estate transfers to your closest surviving family member. According to the legal documents, that would be your spouse, Sarah. The irony was so cruel it took Marcus's breath away. The woman who was betraying him, who was literally moving her lover into their home, could end up inheriting billions if he failed this test. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city where he had lived his entire adult life as a middle-class engineer. Somewhere below, Sarah was probably having lunch with David, planning their future together while discussing how to divide Marcus's modest assets. They had no idea that the man they were discarding like garbage had just become one of the wealthiest people in the Pacific Northwest. "What exactly does the test involve?" he asked, his engineer's mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. Wilson smiled for the first time since Marcus had arrived. "You need to successfully manage one of the resort properties for 30 days. Richard chose Cascade Point Resort in the San Juan Islands. It's where everything started." Marcus returned home that evening with his mind reeling from revelations, but his face carefully composed in the mask of defeat that Sarah and David expected to see. The basement had been converted into his temporary living quarters, complete with an air mattress, a folding table, and a single lamp that cast harsh shadows on the concrete walls. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. While they believed they had relegated him to the lowest point of his life, he was actually planning his ascent to heights they couldn't imagine. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so perfectly timed for his father's posthumous lesson about patience and strategy. From his new basement office, Marcus could hear Sarah and David discussing their future plans over dinner upstairs. Their voices carried clearly through the heating vents, and their casual conversations about selling Marcus's little house and moving to David's condo downtown revealed the depth of their presumption. They spoke about him as if he were already gone, a minor obstacle to be handled with divorce papers and asset division. David's confident laughter echoed through the floorboards as he described his plans for investing Sarah's settlement money in his struggling consulting business. Marcus opened his laptop and began researching private investigation services in Seattle. If he was going to protect his father's empire from people who would destroy it, he needed to understand exactly who he was dealing with. Maria Rodriguez came highly recommended by online reviews, specializing in matrimonial investigations and financial fraud cases. Her website emphasized discretion and thorough documentation, exactly what Marcus needed for the battle ahead. When he called her secure line, her professional demeanor immediately put him at ease, and they arranged to meet the following morning at a coffee shop near her downtown office. The next morning, Marcus drove to Thompson Resort Group's secret headquarters in the Columbia Tower, using the executive access card that Wilson had provided. The 32nd floor buzzed with quiet efficiency, and Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sight of dozens of employees working to manage his father's empire. Patricia Chen, the chief executive officer, greeted him with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who had helped Richard build the company from its humble beginnings into a hospitality powerhouse. "Your father spoke about you constantly," Patricia said as she led Marcus through the executive conference room. "He was incredibly proud of your engineering career, but he always knew you had the intelligence to understand this business too." The walls displayed awards from hospitality industry associations, photographs of stunning resort properties, and framed letters from satisfied guests who had experienced Thompson Resort Group's legendary service standards. Marcus realized that while he was struggling to pay his mortgage, his father had been creating unforgettable experiences for wealthy travelers around the world. Patricia spread out operational reports and financial statements across the mahogany conference table, explaining the intricate details of resort management with the passion of someone who genuinely loved the hospitality industry. Cascade Point Resort is our crown jewel, she explained, pointing to photographs of a stunning property overlooking the San Juan Islands. Your father designed every detail himself, from the sustainable architecture to the locally sourced restaurant menus. The guests don't just stay there, they fall in love with the entire experience. Marcus found himself genuinely fascinated by the complexity of creating luxury experiences, and Patricia seemed pleased by his intelligent questions about occupancy rates, seasonal staffing, and environmental sustainability programs. Meanwhile, Marcus had left his phone recording in the basement, capturing Sarah and David's increasingly bold conversations about their future plans. That evening, he met Maria Rodriguez at a quiet cafe in Belltown, where she reviewed the preliminary evidence he had gathered. Maria was a no-nonsense professional who had clearly seen every variation of marital betrayal in her 15-year career. The recordings are helpful, but we need financial documentation, she explained, sliding a contract across the small table. If David is using your wife to access money, there will be a paper trail. Bank records, credit card statements, investment accounts, everything leaves digital footprints. Back in his basement headquarters, Marcus studied the resort management materials that Patricia had given him while listening to Sarah and David plan their evening out. They were going to an expensive restaurant in downtown Seattle, and Sarah mentioned using her emergency credit card to pay for David's business clothes shopping trip earlier that day. The casual way she spent their joint savings on another man's wardrobe made Marcus's jaw clench, but he forced himself to remain analytical rather than emotional. Every transaction, every casual mention of money, every assumption about their shared future was being documented for later use. The sealed notebook that his father had hidden in the Thompson Resort grew, files contained handwritten observations about leadership, customer service, and business ethics. Richard's careful penmanship filled page after page with insights about managing people, solving problems under pressure, and maintaining dignity in difficult situations. Remember, son, one entry read, true power isn't about making people fear you. It's about making them respect you enough to follow you willingly, even when the path gets difficult. Marcus realized these weren't just business notes. They were his father's final lessons about becoming the man he was meant to be. As Sarah and David returned from their expensive dinner, laughing about wine selections and planning their next romantic getaway, Marcus closed the leadership notebook and opened his laptop to review Patricia's email about Cascade Point Resort's current operational challenges. Tomorrow he would begin his 30-day test while secretly documenting the evidence that would protect his father's legacy from people who saw it only as money to be spent on their own selfish desires. Maria Rodriguez's investigation had been thorough and devastating. Marcus sat in her downtown office 3 weeks after hiring her, staring at a manila folder that contained the complete destruction of his marriage and David Miller's carefully constructed facade. The financial records painted a picture of systematic deception that went far deeper than a simple affair. Sarah had been transferring money from their joint savings account to David's business ventures for 8 months, not 3. Every romantic dinner, every expensive gift, every business opportunity had been funded by Marcus's hard-earned construction projects while he spent his evenings caring for his dying father. David Miller isn't just a failed consultant, Maria explained, spreading bank statements across her desk with the precision of a surgeon. He's been running the same con for years. 3 previous relationships with married women, all ending with significant financial transfers before the women discovered he was married to someone else. The photographs in the file showed David's real wife, Linda Miller, and their 2 children in Portland, Oregon. Linda had filed for divorce 6 months ago, citing financial fraud and abandonment. David had been using Sarah as both an emotional refuge and a funding source for his mounting legal bills. The recorded conversations from Marcus's basement revealed the true scope of Sarah and David's assumptions about their future together. Once we sell Marcus's house and get the divorce settlement, we'll have enough to pay off my legal fees and start fresh, David's voice crackled through the digital recording. Sarah's response was equally damning. He won't fight it. Marcus never fights for anything. Their casual dismissal of 18 years of marriage, their complete confidence that Marcus would simply disappear quietly, made his blood boil with righteous anger. Marcus had spent the past 3 weeks dividing his time between learning resort management at Cascade Point and building his legal case from his basement command center. Patricia Chen had been an invaluable mentor, teaching him the intricacies of hospitality leadership while he secretly documented his wife's betrayal. The contrast between his growing confidence at the resort and his supposed defeat at home created the perfect cover for his investigation. Sarah and David never suspected that the broken man in their basement was actually mastering a billion-dollar empire during his days away from the house. The Thompson Resort Group leadership test had pushed Marcus beyond his comfort zone in ways he hadn't expected. Managing staff, solving guest complaints, coordinating with vendors, and maintaining the property's five-star standards required skills he'd never developed as an engineer. But his father's handwritten notes had guided him through every challenge, and the resort's experienced staff had embraced his collaborative leadership style. Guest satisfaction scores had actually improved during his trial period, and Patricia had privately confided that the board of directors was impressed with his rapid learning curve. Maria's most damning evidence involved David's pattern of financial manipulation. Bank records showed him systematically draining Sarah's credit cards and personal savings while promising to repay everything once his big consulting contract came through. The consulting contract was fictional, created with forged documents that David had used to convince Sarah to invest their future in his lies. "Your wife isn't a bad person," Maria said with professional sympathy. "She's a victim of someone who's very skilled at psychological manipulation." David identifies lonely, vulnerable women and exploits their emotional needs to access their resources. The irony of Sarah's situation would have been poetic if it weren't so destructive. While she believed she was trading up from a struggling engineer to a successful consultant, she was actually being systematically robbed by a con artist who saw her as nothing more than a convenient bank account. David's affection, his romantic gestures, his promises of a better life together were all calculated performances designed to keep her money flowing into his accounts. The expensive dinners and gifts that made Sarah feel special were being purchased with her own savings. Marcus had been careful to document everything through legal channels, ensuring that his evidence would hold up in divorce court and potential criminal proceedings. The financial fraud alone was enough to protect their joint assets, but David's pattern of targeting married women suggested broader criminal behavior that might interest federal investigators. Maria had connections with white-collar crime specialists who were always looking for cases involving interstate fraud and identity theft. The most painful discovery in Maria's investigation was the timeline of Sarah's emotional manipulation. David had targeted her specifically during Richard's illness, identifying her vulnerability and isolation while Marcus spent long hours at the hospital. Every moment of comfort David had offered during those dark months had been calculated to create dependency and trust. He had weaponized Sarah's grief and fear to gain access to their marriage and their money. Patricia called Marcus that evening while he pretended to eat a lonely dinner in his basement exile. "The board has made their decision about your father's test," she said, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. "Your leadership at Cascade Point has exceeded every expectation. The staff loves working with you, guest reviews have been outstanding, and you've solved operational problems that had been lingering for months. You've passed the 30-day test with flying colors." The official announcement would come tomorrow, making Marcus the youngest billionaire resort owner in the Pacific Northwest. As Sarah and David celebrated their future upstairs with expensive wine purchased on her credit card, Marcus sat in his basement reviewing the evidence that would destroy their plans while simultaneously securing his position as the head of a hospitality empire. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation he had been preparing for, armed with truth, legal documentation, and the quiet confidence his father had always taught him was more powerful than any show of force. Marcus scheduled the family meeting for Saturday afternoon, choosing the living room of his own house for maximum psychological impact. He had asked James Wilson to attend as his legal representative, and Maria Rodriguez would be present as his investigator. Sarah seemed puzzled by the formal invitation, but agreed readily, probably assuming Marcus was finally ready to discuss divorce terms that would favor her new life with David. Helen arrived early with an attitude of smug satisfaction, clearly expecting to witness Marcus's final surrender to her daughter's superior life choices. David entered the room with the confident swagger of someone who believed he had already won every battle that mattered. He wore an expensive suit that Sarah had purchased for him the previous week, his smile radiating the charm that had successfully deceived three other women before targeting Marcus's wife. This is quite the production, Marcus, David said with condescending amusement. I hope we can keep things civil and mature. Nobody wants this to get ugly. The casual arrogance in his tone revealed how completely he underestimated the man he had been systematically betraying for months. James Wilson sat quietly in the corner, his leather briefcase containing documents that would reshape everyone's understanding of the situation. Maria Rodriguez had positioned herself near the dining room entrance, her professional demeanor suggesting she was accustomed to confrontations that didn't go according to plan. Marcus stood near the fireplace, his calm presence filling the room with an energy that Sarah seemed to sense but couldn't quite identify. Something had changed about her husband, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what felt different. Thank you all for coming, Marcus began, his voice steady and controlled in a way that made David's smile falter slightly. I wanted to discuss some family matters that have come to my attention recently. Sarah, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room regarding your relationship with David and what that means for our future. Sarah's face flushed, but David stepped forward protectively, his hand finding her shoulder in a gesture that was equal parts possession and manipulation. Marcus, we've been meaning to have this conversation, David said smoothly, launching into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. Sometimes people grow apart, and sometimes new connections develop that we can't ignore. Sarah and I have found something special together, and we think it's best for everyone if we handle this transition with dignity and respect. The practiced words flowed like oil, designed to make Marcus feel grateful for their consideration while they dismantled his life. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, then reached for the first manila folder on the coffee table. That's interesting, David. I've been doing some research on transitions myself. James, would you mind explaining to everyone what Thompson Resort Group is? Wilson opened his briefcase with professional precision, withdrawing documents that bore corporate seals and financial figures that made Helen's eyes widen with confusion. Thompson Resort Group is a luxury hospitality corporation founded by Richard Thompson 28 years ago. Current valuation is approximately $10 billion, with 47 properties spanning the Pacific coast. The room fell silent except for the sound of David's breathing becoming noticeably shallow. Sarah stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language, her mind struggling to connect her modest father-in-law with the corporate empire being described. As of 2 weeks ago, Wilson continued, Marcus Thompson officially became the chief executive officer and sole owner of Thompson Resort Group, having successfully completed his father's leadership evaluation at Cascade Point Resort. Helen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her years of disdainful comments about Marcus's financial prospects crumbling into irrelevant dust. David's charming confidence evaporated as he processed the implications of what he was hearing. The man he had dismissed as a weak, struggling engineer was actually one of the wealthiest individuals in the Pacific Northwest. That's impossible, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her world reshaping itself. Marcus opened the second folder, this one containing Maria's investigation results. David, I'd like you to meet Maria Rodriguez, the private investigator who's been looking into your background. Maria, would you mind sharing what you discovered about David's previous relationships and current marital status? Maria's professional presentation of bank records, police reports, and marriage certificates painted a devastating picture of systematic fraud and emotional manipulation that had been refined through years of practice. The revelation that David was still married to Linda Miller in Portland, that he had children he'd abandoned, that he'd run the same financial con on multiple women, hit Sarah like physical blows. Her face went white as she realized that every romantic gesture, every promise of their future together, every moment of intimacy had been calculated manipulation designed to access her money. Linda Miller filed for divorce 6 months ago, citing financial fraud and abandonment, Maria explained. David has been using the money you provided to fund his legal defense against criminal charges. David's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the desperate criminal underneath the polished exterior. This is harassment, he snarled, his voice losing all pretense of charm. You can't prove any of this holds up in court. Marcus smiled quietly, the expression carrying none of the weakness David had exploited for months. Actually, we can prove all of it. Bank records, recorded conversations, documented evidence of wire fraud across state lines. The FBI is very interested in your pattern of targeting married women for financial exploitation. Sarah collapsed into her chair, the weight of her betrayal and victimization crushing her spirit as thoroughly as her betrayal had crushed Marcus's heart months earlier. Helen sat in stunned silence. Her years of treating Marcus with contempt suddenly revealed as catastrophically poor judgment. The man she had dismissed as unworthy of her daughter was not only wealthy beyond her imagination, but had demonstrated grace and intelligence in the face of treatment that would have broken lesser men. 6 months had transformed Marcus Thompson's life in ways he couldn't have imagined during those dark days in his basement exile. The executive suite on the 32nd floor of the Columbia Tower had become his second home, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Seattle's skyline and Elliott Bay beyond. The mahogany desk where he now made decisions affecting thousands of employees was the same one his father had used to build Thompson Resort Group from a single property into a hospitality empire. Marcus had kept Richard's leather chair and his handwritten notebooks, daily reminders of the values and vision that would guide the company's future. Thompson Resort Group had flourished under Marcus's leadership, embracing an innovative approach that combined luxury hospitality with social responsibility and environmental stewardship. The company's new community development initiative partnered with local organizations to provide job training and education programs in every region where they operated. Marcus had personally overseen the launch of scholarship funds for hospitality students from underrepresented backgrounds, ensuring that his father's legacy would create opportunities for future generations. The business press had praised his compassionate capitalism model, but Marcus knew he was simply applying the lessons Richard had taught him about treating people with dignity and respect. The legal proceedings surrounding David Miller had concluded with satisfying justice. Federal prosecutors had built a strong case for wire fraud and interstate financial crimes, and David was currently serving a 3-year sentence in federal prison while facing additional civil lawsuits from his previous victims. Sarah had cooperated fully with the investigation once she understood the extent to which she had been manipulated and used. The divorce had been finalized quietly, with Sarah receiving a modest settlement that reflected the actual assets she had brought to the marriage rather than any claim to Thompson Resort Group. Marcus had surprised everyone, including himself, by feeling genuine sympathy for Sarah during the legal proceedings. Maria Rodriguez had been right. Sarah was more victim than villain, targeted by a sophisticated predator who had exploited her loneliness and vulnerability during his father's illness. The woman who had once shared his dreams and built a life with him had been systematically destroyed by someone who saw her only as a means to financial gain. While Marcus couldn't forgive the betrayal, he could understand how someone grieving and isolated might fall prey to such calculated manipulation. Helen had attempted to reconcile with Marcus after learning about his wealth, sending awkward letters and showing up at Thompson Resort Group offices with requests for family meetings. Marcus had declined these overtures with polite firmness, understanding that her sudden interest in maintaining family relationships had nothing to do with genuine affection and everything to do with potential financial benefit. Some bridges, once burned by years of contempt and disrespect, couldn't be rebuilt simply because circumstances had changed. The transformation of Cascade Point Resort had become Marcus's personal passion project, incorporating sustainable technologies and local community partnerships that his father had only dreamed of implementing. The property now featured solar panels disguised as artistic installations, a water recycling system that supported the island's ecosystem, and a farm-to-table restaurant that sourced ingredients exclusively from local organic farmers. Guest satisfaction scores had reached record highs, and the resort had become a model for environmentally responsible luxury hospitality that other companies were eager to emulate. On a crisp October afternoon, Marcus stood on the deck of Cascade Point Resort's main lodge, watching the sunset paint the San Juan Islands in shades of gold and crimson that photographers traveled thousands of miles to capture. The annual Thompson Resort Group Charity Gala was taking place in the main ballroom behind him, where Seattle's business elite had gathered to support the company's education initiatives. The sound of classical music and polite conversation drifted through the open doors, but Marcus preferred the peaceful solitude of the ocean view that had inspired his father's original vision. "The party's getting started without its host," Maria Rodriguez said softly, Charlie joining him at the deck railing. She wore an elegant black dress that transformed her from the no-nonsense investigator he had hired into a stunning woman whose intelligence and strength had gradually captured his attention over the past few months. Their relationship had developed slowly and naturally through shared dinners after business meetings, long conversations about justice and second chances, and quiet moments like this one where words weren't necessary to communicate understanding. "I was just thinking about my father," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the contentment that had replaced the pain and anger of earlier months. "He would have loved seeing this place fulfill its potential, not just the financial success, but the way it's becoming something that makes people's lives better." Maria moved closer, her shoulder brushing against his as they watched a ferry navigate between the islands below. "He'd be proud of the man you've become, Marcus, not because of the money or the business success, but because of how you've used your power to lift other people up." The charity gala represented everything Marcus wanted Thompson Resort Group up to become, a force for positive change that created beautiful experiences while supporting communities and protecting the environment. Tomorrow he would return to Seattle to review expansion plans for sustainable resorts in underserved coastal communities. Next month he would visit the scholarship recipients whose educations were being funded by Thompson Resort Group's endowment. But tonight, standing beside a woman who had helped him find justice and truth, overlooking the waters where his father's dreams had first taken shape, Marcus felt ready for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead.